Well, here we go. We are off and running. We got people slowly trickling in. So as people are trickling in, I'm going to do the thing that everyone does at the beginning of these. We are, you're all in sort of listen only mode right now, but you can ask questions. Questions can be asked in the Q&A module. You should be able to see that at the bottom of the Zoom app. So that's the best place to ask questions. There is a chat as well. Feel free to chat, have fun, be respectful. I will take monitor that for questions, but that Q&A module is the best. My name is Adam. I'm with Tessellation and Data Coach. Today, we are talking about what to consider when selecting your business intelligence platform. Our sponsors are Tessellation and Data Coach. Tessellation is a modern analytics consultancy. We enable and manage organizations' analytics and self-service teams by educating people, optimizing technology, developing world-class products, and providing sustainable results. Also brought to you by Data Coach, where most analytics training programs lack depth. Data Coach provides wisdom. Our modern curriculum is unparalleled, comprising of video lessons, hands-on exercises, and a capstone project designed around your company's data. Data Coach also offers a truly premium service, one-on-one coaching. All right, to the main event. We've got two speakers here today. In no particular order, first we got Luke. Luke is one of 34 international individuals awarded Tableau's highest honor, the Tableau Zen Master title. He is renowned in the analytics industry for both his mentorship and dexterity in data visualization tools, data science, and enterprise data strategy. Also joining us today, Spencer is a true master at crafting insightful visualizations and has devoted his career to helping organizations leverage their data through the industry's best data viz tools, Tableau and Power BI. There's so much more I could say about these guys. You didn't come here to hear me talk, so let's turn it over to them. Spencer, Luke, let's roll.
Well, Adam, thank you for that intro. It sounds like you could be a radio DJ one day. Luke, how are you?
I'm doing good. Hey, Spencer. I think this will be an interesting session. I think Spencer's references to a previous career that Adam once had, and hence the introduction. But we're here today to talk a little bit about selecting business intelligence platforms and how to go about it. We're gonna, really briefly cover a lot of different points. When we really think about how we do this and how Tessellation sort of approaches this, we have essentially 20 points to cover. We are not going to cover all of those today. I think we're really going to cover 5 of those, if I do recall, today. But we'll cover introductions. We did that. We've got essentially one topic to cover. And if you have any Q&A, feel free to add it in chat as we go, and we'll sort of answer it ad hoc. So let's get rolling.
Luke, let me ask you a question. Why are we talking about this topic?
Oh, well, I think, for me, it's an ever-present topic in any organization of how, when we think about what an organization actually wants to be, which is, we could just call it more data-driven, data-informed, lots of jargon around it. What we're really talking about is getting information and data to everyone in the organization and making it useful for them, of which today business intelligence platforms play a huge role. I think that's why we're talking about it, and that's really our expertise, right? What do we talk about every day? We talk about these platforms and how they're utilized. That's how we work with clients, and that's why we're having this session today.
So it seems like there are a lot of different platforms that people can choose from. How do you see those conversations going? Are people considering all of these tools, one tool, a combination of certain ones, or what are you seeing?
Well, all sorts is what you're describing. I think And that's what, again, we're here to talk about today. Spencer, if you want to help drive the conversation forward on this, is that when we look at the Magic Quadrant, I think is what you're trying to ask me, is like, it's something that's ever present that we all encounter as professionals, is the Gartner Magic Quadrant. What does it even mean? Well, we sort of have this two-dimensional scale of which we're constantly forced and see things ranked from us individual, essentially, providing us market intelligence on it. And we constantly just look to the top right corner and say, all right, there are a couple of key players. It's Microsoft and Tableau. And there is certainly some other technologies that exist. But overall, I don't look at it as being like I look at it as more like, where are they on a single continuum, and not sort of these two continuum as Gartner shows here. But like, with that, there's two standouts. There's Microsoft, there's Tableau, and then there's everyone else. Certainly a lot of competitors, but in terms of a mature platform, we've got two.
Are you ready for my hot take, Luke?
Let's hear it.
I think the Gartner Magic Quadrant matters. I really do.
Well, okay, tell me more.
This is the reason I think it matters. I'm not going to say it's accurate. Accurate and mattering to me are different. Do I think that the scale and the criteria that they use year after year to, how it changes and evolves throughout the different years, do I always think it's 100% right? Or no, I don't. Do I think that they always get every dot placement right? Do they, assess each tool 100% accurately? No. I mean, that'd be really, really hard to do. But what I think they do, what I think they do well is I think that they assess tools relative to one another. And I think that's important. And for me, when I look at it, and something that always stands out to me is the completeness of vision. And when we talk about these tools and we talk about enterprise deployments and we talk about using tools, not just in one team, one organization, but across a multitude of users, is how complete is a company's capabilities, skills stack to enabling people all across an organization with different capabilities. And so I think that's one thing that they do well, and that's why I do put a little bit of value in these rankings.
I'm not saying they're not useful. I just, in the end, I look at it as not a two-sided, I look at it as a single continuum, right? A single line, and we see who the leaders are, and we can sort of see where everyone else falls. And it is relative, like it's where, how closely related are you to the next point?
Sure. So Luke, when we go into organizations and we see people talking about the Magic Quadrant, when we hear people talking about choosing a tool or tools, plural, for the organization, a lot of different things come up, right? And it can depend on what industry you're in. It could depend on your need. It could depend on a lot of different things. But like you said, we have over 20 points to consider. We're not going to get to all 20, but we did distill it down to a list of 5. And so if you're seeing the screen right now, you can see this pyramid. And the reason that we visualize these things as a pyramid, because they're not all independent of one another, right? They all stack on top of one another. Now, depending on your org, your leadership, whatever, these different pillars or these different sections could be higher or lower than one another, but it's an all-encompassing decision. Not one of these is going to make the decision versus the other, or vice versa. But so, I just like to think about this as building on one another and what your priorities are, and how you see your organizational needs. So, Luke, does any one of these stand out to you before we go and discuss each of these a little more in depth?
I know we discussed this a little bit differently between the two of us, but the thing that stands out here that always is number one for me and is in sort of in the wrong spot, but it's not the pyramid shape that I should be concerned about. It's the layers. I understand that. But to me, number one is leadership. ultimately, like when we're thinking about what we want to do, we don't the reality is that adoption starts with leadership, and it doesn't a top-down approach is reality, and it's not a bottom-up sort of gain ground and sort of develop a need for it. It's rather leadership are going to drive that, and for me, it's getting the buy-in from leadership, getting the budget from leadership, and there's a lot of work that can go into that, and we're going to discuss that. For me, that's the most important factor that we're always going to consider. We're going to have other components like process and infrastructure and strategy that are all going to tie into it, and talent, all of those are components, but in the end, those are pillars, and the base is what leadership is going to help and provide.
Got you. So do you think that if leadership likes one tool over the other, that should trump everything, or is that a consideration?
I mean, it's a consideration, no doubt. If a leader has a certain affinity for a tool set, that will be a single input. But in the reality of what we're facing, that we don't have a slide on this deck, the real reality is that many organizations are moving from what we can call traditional business intelligence, which is tool first, I need a BI tool because I know I need one and I'll provide it, and I don't care about the users or the use cases, to a much user-centric model. We can call it business intelligence modernization approach, where these organizations are now saying, you know what I care about is the user adoption. What I care about are the use cases that are coming out, and it's the right tool for the right need. So that's, to me, what ultimately should be driving the adoption is from your side as the person who may be selecting the tool, is you're thinking, what are the use cases that are driving the need for this, and how much am I going to right size it to? Once we understand the use cases and who's going to use it, we can size it correctly, and we don't have to land on a single tool. I think one of the questions you asked earlier was how many tools are you going with a single tool? The answer is no. The answer is the right tool for the right need, and knowing that it's going to match what that need is, and the cost constraints will come in after you understand what you can provide.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the large organizations that we work at, and I know I don't necessarily have a indicator of what I'm qualifying as large, but a lot of these companies oftentimes have teams running, different tools, right? So it's not always, excuse me, choose one or choose the other. There's a lot of different ways to get things done, but choosing the best one is always the goal. Right. So, and I'm going to answer my own question here, Luke, is you said leadership is number one. I'm going with integrations, and we will discover why here in our talk shortly.
All right,
so
let's do it.
Let's dive into our first topic, existing infrastructure. Now, I put this one first because it's kind of the assumption, right? I mean, it's kind of assumed that if you are looking at other BI tools, or that you are looking at, switching your BI platforms, that you obviously have to take into consideration what is already in your toolkit, right? But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that in terms of, it's not just what do you have now, it's how comfortable are you using that tool? How do you see this tool progressing into the future in terms of its place in the market, its potential innovation, who owns it now, if it's gotten purchased recently, what do they plan to do with the tool? So when we think about existing infrastructure, it's not just, hey, we have tool X and that's what we have. No, it's how comfortable are you with it? Do you like its, where it's going down the future, the things in that company's leadership? Are you comfortable with that? Luke, have you seen some of these things, be considered when talking about different tools? Or how have you seen them considered?
Well, I think it's not necessarily exist. Like, one of the things you brought up that resonates with me, and it's something that I think you're leading me on to in answering this question, is like, it is not what the tool, like the existing infrastructure and is not necessarily just what's existing, but like, let's cross out existing in this and just say infrastructure. And it's a better conversation to have, because one of the lost components of this is understanding, if you're going to select a tool, what is their roadmap for the future and how will it continue to support your needs. Again, it always is going to, for me, come back to what are your use cases? What is the tool selection going to be? And in this case, after you sort of look at it, how does it fit into your existing infrastructure? But also, how does it evolve? How is that product going to evolve and become more or less accessible over time? So I think that's part of, if we're referencing Magic Quadrant, is in many ways they're suggesting winners and losers, and people who are evolving fast and people who are evolving slow. They're all evolving. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But the whole point of one of the sort of parts, one of the components to that on Magic Quadrant, is talking about the evolution of the product and where they are headed. And if you do take that component into consideration in this, which we all should, is that we shouldn't just say, what does the tool do for me now, but what will it do for me in the future?
Absolutely.
Like, and I think, like, to that point is like, where Tableau is 5 years ago is not the same product that it is today.
All right, we're dropping names now. We're dropping product names. So,
or where Power BI was 5 years ago to today.
All right. So, I mean, building off what you just said, Luke, you know, there's been some big purchases. If you've been following the BI industry for the past, probably we'll call it 5 years, you know, you've seen a lot of tools getting snapped up by bigger companies with Tableau and Salesforce and Looker and Google and, you know, a couple others. You know, how do you see, or what have you noticed since some of these acquisitions, Luke? How has that changed the market and projection for some of these different tools?
Actually, you know, I don't think it's something. It's something that could be advertised and something that could technically be considered in the selection of your product. But I think if there's one thing that I've seen fairly consistently, is that the acquisition of these tools in the short term has meant very little change in the existing tool set. And that is exemplified in many ways at the beginning here of the Salesforce acquisition of Tableau. And also, if you look at Looker and the acquisition of it by Google, the tools haven't fundamentally shifted a ton. There's definitely some integrations happening from both of those tools, but really it's, to me, a minor consideration in the selection of the tool.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily been blown away by the Tableau acquisition, but I think a very big pro is, you know, you get a lot more resources, you get a lot more capital money to hopefully innovate on your tool, right? I mean, part of the thing that we've seen with Microsoft, you know, and Power BI over the past couple of years is you're playing with some big pockets, right? And so to continue to evolve and compete and et cetera, I like seeing them, you know, gain access to some of those resources. Adam, you have a question?
Yeah, we had a question come in. Hopefully this is pertinent, but the question was asked about any things we need to take into account or into consideration if you're planning on moving from one platform to another. Do organizations do that? What do they take into account? What considerations when switching?
Oh yeah, certainly. And I mean, there's a lot of things, and I think we're going to hit on a few of them as we go on to the next couple topics here. Actually, Luke, just to have that question tee us up, let's talk about our next topic, which is source systems and integrations. I think this rolls right into, probably what this, the person was asking is, I mean, there's a ton of different things to consider when switching. And one of those is, what systems integrate best with not just your BI tool, but with how you consume it and, how you interact with not only the data, but the platform itself. So what I'm thinking of right now, right, is on here is, we have the two suites up there. We have the Google suite and then the Office suite, right? Power BI is a Microsoft tool, integrates extremely well and shares with Teams extremely well. Obviously integrates with Azure and all these different data sources seamlessly. So those are things that when you're switching, you need to take that into account. Am I switching away from something that integrates more easily? Am I switching towards something that is going to be an easier integration? And when making the decision, those are definitely things that you need to take into account.
For me, it comes down to maybe like 3 points here. First of all, what Spencer brought up here is, what's your data environment? What are the tools and technologies already being used? If you're already like a fully Azure company, that might, and sort of the reporting needed might be, if it's extremely simple, might just
I think we lost Luke's audio here, Spencer. Do you got the same thing going on?
Yeah, same thing here.
All right, tap dance away, my friend.
Yeah, no, I got you. I mean, and what Luke was saying is, if you are transitioning not only your BI platform, but it should go a lot of times in sync with your backend, your data architecture, your data infrastructure. So choosing your BI tool is not just a isolated decision. A lot of times it goes hand in hand with determining your backend stuff. So if you're going and migrating a lot of your stuff to Snowflake, or if you are moving a lot of your stuff into Azure storage, right? There's a lot of things to consider other than the BI platform. And you should generally consider those things at the same time, or at least a lot of companies do consider those items at the same time. Luke.
Yeah, I got Wi-Fi dropped.
We have you back.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I'll cancel the 911 call, Luke. I'll call them right now. Be right back.
What's your data environment? What's your data strategy? And how are you going to govern your data? I know it's not one that really gets talked about too much, but given your industry, you have to consider how are you going to manage and monitor your data and govern it appropriately as to the law. And to me, that's obviously going to be a big component. Some players are going to make it much more difficult to work with. So
yeah, I'm going to name drop on this one, Luke. So one of the things I love about Power BI and how it integrates in a Microsoft stack, right, is when I open Office 365, office.com, I go and I log in to my company email, right? I got my Outlook, I got my Excel, I got my, OneNote, I got my everything around the left hand, and then I got my Power BI. It's literally right in the same menu with the rest of the apps that I'm going to use from the Office suite. So when we talk integration, that's one of the huge things for me is it's so accessible. It's a one-stop shop. It's so accessible to the other things that I'm going to use on a day-to-day basis. One thing that we had talked about earlier is a little bit about cost, and people watching might say, well, why, right? Well, if you already have an existing relationship with a company, you already have other software from a company, a lot of times there's better prices, especially with Office. If you're above E5, or I forget the exact licensure, that you could get Power BI Pro licenses for free or for a very cheap price. So there are some of those things that could pay off in terms of price too when it comes to integration. Luke, I saw you were going to say something.
Well, I'm still to like that other point is on the governance side is knowing and having transparency to how your data are being used and why they're being used is going to be, not all platforms operate under the same, obviously under the same model for that. Some are a little more decentralized, some are extremely centralized. I think two of those examples are in the top right corner, right? If we're sort of trying to split hairs between Tableau and Power BI, is that Power BI is very decentralized in many ways, and being able to say like, right, each workspace sort of operates independently of each other, and it's very difficult to bring all the components together, versus Tableau is typically handled under a single server with multiple sites that
Yeah.
allow you to sort of understand how the tools are being used and how the data are being used across what is essentially different workspaces.
Sure, sure. Well, let's just change gears just slightly. But I think this is a big one. I think this is a lot on a lot of people's minds. If you are at that like BI manager level, right? So you're a manager, you're sitting right above either some analysts or developers, and you're interfacing with management who may be making this decision. They're asking for your feedback, they're asking for your input. You're asking your team for feedback, input, sending it right back up. So these are some factors that you might consider that maybe you didn't consider before, but the three things that we like to bring up is time, money, and then your collective community or knowledge base. What some people colloquially refer to as tribal knowledge of your team, right? What you all know as a team. And so when we talk about time, we're talking about literally the time that it takes to teach people a new tool. It can be time to hire people with a skill set of the tool you're moving to. It's also the time that it'll take to deliver things to stakeholders, whether that means you have to push back sprints, timings, goal dates, or it literally may take your team longer to develop in one tool versus the other for a plethora of reasons. But time is a huge one that I see reiterated in this context, sometimes even more than money. Do we lose Luke again, Adam, or is that me?
It looks like either he's frozen or he's really in deep thinking right now. You said something so intriguing that he's really thinking deeply.
I'm just going to assume I stumped Luke so bad. Actually, screenshot this. I stumped Luke Stanke so bad. He's speechless.
Totally speechless.
So just, we'll move on this in terms of money, right? And it involves some of the things I just mentioned. Money, it could be bringing on people, right? Bringing on new people is always going to be more expensive than having an existing team person, or almost always, right? I'm sure there's some exceptions, but going through that process of interview and recruiting and bringing in someone from outside searching for jobs, that's almost always going to take more money to do that. And then there's the money in terms of training, right? If you want to go the internal training route, most of the time that's going to involve a consultant, or it's going to involve a training course, or it's going to involve some sort of seminar or subscription. So there's a lot of other costs that you need to associate with choosing, switching, etc. That may not always be obvious. And Luke, it looks like we have you back again.
Maybe we'll see what happens. My Wi-Fi is extremely sketchy right now.
Okay. The story was that I stumped you so bad you were speechless. But do you have any thoughts on these topics here? We were just talking about time and money of switching / considering to switch. Yep.
This is, if there's anything that it really there are other factors that play a role. There's no doubt that we just talked about. But in the end, the one that should, to me, be considered the most, this is what I led with, is that like if you have any influence, it's how quickly you can get your entire organization or your business unit or your team or whatever level you're at making that decision is, it's like, how are you taking the use cases, the things that need to be created with data, and getting the right tool in front of them in order to make sure that they are adopting it and the users of those tools and those products are also adopting it. That's what should drive this decision. And if it means being able to do it faster or cost a little less or cost a little, like, those are balances that you're going to have to make in this decision. But really, to me, it's like, again, you've already said this, is that adoption process and the speed of which you're willing to potentially sacrifice cost to get it done. And I'll just add, I think it would fall into the skill knowledge piece here, or a separate point in the talent development is like, what are the processes that you're willing to put in place, or how do the tool facilitates cross-functional sharing, meaning across teams or within team, intra-functional sharing as well. And then part of the talent development piece, regardless, is going to be what are the ways that your organization are facilitating that training, or the events that you're providing to recognize the amazing products that are coming out of your business intelligence platform. So it's really like, it's a separate of like, what's the support in here? I guess it's the pink circle in the background.
Totally. So let's switch gears to a really fun topic, and I think we might get more tool specific real quick. Requirement needs, right? Not all BI tools are made equal when it comes to what they can and can't do. Some do things a little easier. Maybe they can accomplish the same task, but they either take more time or they do them slightly less effectively, etc. One of the things that I've noticed, Luke, or that I recommend always to clients when it comes to requirement needs is, do you have a niche use case for mapping, geospatial, anything where you're taking latitude and longitude, etc., and it's a key part of what you're doing? I think Tableau does it better than anybody. Thoughts? You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, Tableau is in many cases the closest, despite Power BI being part of a larger stack. I think Tableau is the closest to a full stack tool around the data and the governance of the data. And to me, and clearly the
Did you say Tableau is, or
Tableau,
Power BI
yes.
is?
Tableau. I mean, we're talking about like, how do you, and the reason I say that is like, the reality is it comes down to the governance of that information sitting on the platform, and you can handle some of that in separate tools in the Microsoft stack. But in Tableau, when we're talking about what are the data that are on the server, that is something that Tableau handles at a top level.
Okay. I don't want, like, how, when you say governance and stuff on the server, like, what, can you dive a little bit more in depth into what you mean? Because I don't necessarily.
Again, if we're like, the product features talking about data catalog is one of those options that Tableau has that isn't necessarily available when we think about other tools. The ability to sort of see, again, how all of the data on that server are being used across the entire organization is a lot easier than, say, having multiple workspaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think a workspace is probably comparable either to a project, right? To a project or a site. Yeah, probably more of a project. It's somewhere in between a project and a site, right? Probably more of a project. Now that I'm thinking about it. maybe there's not a direct comparison, but are you saying, I mean, you know, in Power BI, right, or in Power BI service, there's, you know, data lineages that you can really effectively in a GUI interface see, you know, where data is coming from, flowing from, to, you know, what reports, data sets, data flows, et cetera. You know, and then it's a really easy integration from the data governance side with your Azure AD groups, right? With your Active Directory groups. So I've seen that integration be really, really smooth because a lot of people with Office already have those AD groups in place to be able to set up those data security and governance measures.
Is that a question back?
It's. I think I meant it more as a rebuttal.
Okay.
Not that we're taking sides.
No, not at all.
Okay. Is there something that you've seen Tableau do just hands, you know, just head and shoulders above other tools? What is the one thing that you would say Tableau does better?
Well, I think you're trying to lead me on to the specific custom visuals for the developer, and that's being the solution. But that's not always going to be the need or the case for many organizations. I think the reality is many organizations are, and you know, the folks using the tools just need very simple insights, and part of that is like, I'm not too concerned about the visualizations that are being produced from any tool. It's rather the calculations or analysis that are required to get there. And I would say like Tableau is the easier tool to get to that calculation, that insight, and that Power BI can become a little bit cumbersome for certain calculations as a result of the coding that is required to get to that insight. And that would like specifically mean like doing maybe something as simple as like year-over-year calculations.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up year-over-year calculations because actually Power BI has built-in time intelligence functions in DAX. So it's extremely easy to do totals year-to-date or totals previous year-to-date using either the totals year-to-date function or same period last year. The other thing that you said.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you're describing though is the complicated work that has to be done in DAX. If we're like, this takes us actually back to the adoption of users and the time that's required and like how difficult that can be. Is that when we're talking about scale and scaling with an organization and making sure that all users can adopt, that is frankly a real challenge that still has to be like, again, depending on your like the level of user that you're thinking about. To me, the everyday analyst is not someone who's going to become fluent in DAX. And that is the challenge that Power BI faces in adoption. And if you're willing to invest that time, then you can get to the analysis that you want. Of course, both tools, no doubt, take time. But that's what I'm saying as a real challenge to scaling the organization.
Let me just respond to that really quick before we keep going. Luke, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of people is, you know, where do people generally start data journeys or understanding of these concepts? It's Excel, right? I mean, we got, you know, pretty much if you are in the BI space today, I mean, I would bet a lot of money you have started your journey in Excel or you've used it a lot along the way. That's a Microsoft product, right? So there's a lot of similarities between the syntax in regards to DAX and Power Query being M, right? There's a lot of similarities to Excel. So some people would say, Luke, that, you know, the time to teach cumbersome DAX, well, a lot of people find it easy because they're coming from a Microsoft Excel background.
I mean, you're saying that, but in reality, when you're actually working in the interface and you're talking with users, I don't think that's what they say when they start working in DAX.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Another question to consider when it comes to requirement needs. Does your data need cleansing or not already, right? We're talking about Tableau prep. Do we need to use Tableau prep? Do we need Power Query? Although I will note that Power Query comes embedded in Power BI Desktop, right? So it's not an added fee or a data management add-on or anything like that. So, considering whether or not your data is going to be curated and clean for you already is something to consider when choosing tools. The last topic in terms of requirements that we want to touch on is, are your stakeholders adamant about using a particular tool? I've actually seen this quite a few times, Luke, and maybe you can add on to this, but I've actually seen end users who go, no, I'm not using that tool. I love Tableau. I want to use this tool, and we need to make sure it can, or we want to see if it can work here first rather than exploring other options. I've seen it way more than one time. Luke, I mean, have you ever run into that where people are like, no, we want to use this tool because we like it and we're not going to consider others?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think that's always good. I mean, that's the preference, right? It's just like sometimes it is one of those conversation points for right tool, right place. And sometimes the user kind of says, this is the right tool, and you have to believe that. Like, there's an implicit trust that we must make with our audience, with our users, with our stakeholders. And when they say they are looking for something and this is the tool, that you're willing to trust them with that. Or at least, if that's not the case, provide them significant guidance in the adoption of a different tool.
Totally. All right, you name this as your number one out of the 5, Luke. Leadership, in terms of depending on your leadership's preferences, budget, right? Leaders are always thinking in terms of budget, numbers. Is this going to be over our expenses for a year, training? There's a lot of other things that come into hand when you're talking about budget as well, right?
Budget is obviously an important concern. There's only ever so much that you're like dollars that are going to be available. But this actually comes back to if you sit somewhere in the middle, right? You're not at the top making the final decision, and you're somewhere in the middle and you're trying to influence leadership on this topic. The thing that you need to do, again, living in the world of BI modernization, the one thing that you should be doing in this process is gathering the use cases, and as part of the use case, identifying potential ROI in terms of time savings, dollars saved, potential new insights that you're targeting as a result, or new products that are going to come out of this, being able to create that list and align it and say, you know what, this product costs X dollar, and the value return that we're going to see is some multiple greater than 1 on the other side, whether it's, again, time saved, dollar saved, new product, new insights that are targeted and how they could be utilized. Of course, you're not going to be able to nail that number perfectly, but I've found over time, like, the numbers come out pretty close when you take all the possible projects and align them with all the possible ROI. So again, when you're influencing, what matters is the delta there. What's the difference between the budget concern and the actual value that's going to be returned? And then if the budget gets tight, is then taking the use cases where you potentially see the most value and targeting just those use cases to show the value, to gain additional budget for the future, to do the remaining backlog. Because again, if you are planning this process out, you will know the use cases and know exactly what needs to get done.
That's, yeah, no, 100%. Luke, let's just say there's a situation, right, where your organizational leader is just dead set on using one tool or another. What are some things that people could bring up, or are there any
And
ways that
again,
you
it comes back to what the loss of ROI. What it comes
Okay.
down to, there's no like, it doesn't have to be a single tool by any means. Multi-tool solutions, right tool, right need, and if you can identify the potential loss in value as a result of having to be land into a single tool, which is the wrong preferred tool, there should be no arguments. It should be driven strictly out of understanding that difference. And if it's still there, like at least you gave it a strong shot. Some leaders are definitely going to be tied fully to believing that there's no need for other tools. But when it comes down to it, it's a value decision.
Okay, let's talk value. Let's talk value. And it's very important, like you've been saying. Value, right, is going to be a huge function of how expensive it is to not only own a tool, but to switch a tool, correct?
Absolutely. There's
Right.
like, I think what you're leading up to is like, if you're thinking about switching tools, is like, what's the change management cost
Yes.
associated with going
Yes.
from one tool to another, and just,
That's right.
you know, making is not random decision. The one thing that can easily be left off is like, all right, I'm going to switch to this tool because it's a cheaper list price, or even when I think about like the total costs on server, it's overall lower. But the real challenge is going to be, how long is it going to take for those users to adopt a new tool, learn it, start using it at the level that they were before? That's a hard thing to do.
Certainly, and I think we got to some of that in the, in the training time, time, money, skill slide. What would you say to those who would say, Luke, you're a Tableau Zen master, right? How would you respond to people saying, "Hey, Tableau's really expensive. There's some cheaper options out there," right? What is your word of advice to them?
I've sort of already called out the value here. It's what is your ROI in being able to have a much more flexible tool that can do much more sophisticated analyses. It is looking at, in terms of governance, how your ability to sort of have a centralized understanding of information. And like, really what it comes down to is, again, the mindset of BI modernization. To me, when you talk and you look at other organizations and how the flexibility, the time to adoption for Tableau, it is ultimately where you're going to see the value. It's how fast can you adopt this new tool. And for me, Tableau is a tool that is much easier to adopt for an individual, and therefore you will see greater value in the long term.
Gotcha. I have had maybe a little bit different of experiences in terms of users, adopting one tool faster than the other, et cetera. I do think that if you are a database architect, right, if you kind of have the a back-end mind frame, right, like information systems, database architecture, master data management, right? I think Power BI really makes sense for a lot of folks when it comes to the data modeling capabilities, data transformation capabilities, just how, when you're writing DAX, how you're writing calculations based upon, the relationships between your fact and dimension tables. Whereas I've seen a lot of people say, hey, I'm an analyst. I just want to bring in some data. I want to do some quick analyses, boom, boom, tell a story and get out. I've seen a lot of them enjoy using, Tableau a lot for those type of tasks. Luke, did we lose you?
He went on mute. Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
I got a question here that
All right.
popped up, and this might be a good time to ask this one.
Yeah.
In terms of BI use cases, where do you see the demand trending? As in, how much work is focused on now traditional BI dashboarding versus other use cases like self-service search, NLP, etc. You guys comment on that one?
Yeah, So I just have a quick comment on this topic, and I'll let Luke expound a little bit after. But my experience with this is, you know, I can't say enough. There are so many articles on LinkedIn and Twitter or wherever about machine learning and AI and yada. And those, like, listen, though, if you are at the stage in your organization where you're doing all the baseline stuff great, and you've really moved on to some more advanced uh, BI capabilities, that's awesome. Great on you. I can't tell you how many companies I've seen that struggle with getting data to a database on a consistent basis, refreshing reports, and having consistent and accurate reporting. So, this is a little different answer to that question, but my experience has been, there is a trend in terms of titles and articles that are being published, in my opinion, moving towards these different capabilities. I think there's so much work still to be done by the average company when it comes to getting timely and accurate reports in front of end users to let them know, daily sales, weekly sales. Yeah, that's my answer.
So a very loaded question that I'm sitting here trying to, it's multi-part, multi-threaded conversation to have on a number of topics. On the like fundamentally, when we think about traditional BI, the way that I look at it is like, take a ticket, make a thing, make a report. And adoption is adoption. That's up to the people where the ticket was made. When we're talking about a modern approach with all of the bells and whistles, it's really focused on user adoption and making sure that the analyst is served with what they need. And I think that there's so much in, like, what do we have, like 2 minutes really to wrap up here? There's so much to be said about self-service and the platform itself, which we didn't even get into, of which both platforms can offer some level of, well, really many of the platforms can offer self-service options, but that is it, like building certified data sources, certified data sets, layers for it, to allow for exploration, I think is as Spencer sort of maybe alluded to it, is like, that's a later phase when you sort of have matured into a space where your audience is asking very specific questions about the data. If you're there, that's amazing. That's going to come after you've sort of taken an individual product and had it mature, and you now have your audience asking questions that are outside of the scope of that product.
Yeah.
And I will just add to it, like, one other note, sort of side note, is when I hear the NLP play, that is also, I think, to Spencer's point, is something that we know, like, where is NLP come into play is in the ability to search for insights and type that out. There's a whole dedicated product to it called ThoughtSpot. Tableau has Ask Data as one of their one of their spinoffs as well. That product still requires a lot of setup and organization by someone behind the scenes, indexing the right information so that when someone wants to search for a certain data point, and this is the big difference on an NLP to me, when I think about it, you're searching across the data for one number. And the equivalent is a traditional BI report with a lot of filters where you might be asking, let's get to that one thing. In many ways, that is where I think these NLP platforms do succeed, is like, you're basically in text saying, I want to see this number with these conditions, and being able to do it really quickly. But it still requires a lot of setup to get to that point.
Sure. Luke, we got a couple other questions here real quick. I just want to read one. You hear tons of stories of people having a wow moment with Tableau where their eyes are open to the world of data viz and how easy it is to get to insight. I've honestly never heard anyone say that about Power BI. I've had that moment. I've had that moment with Power BI.
Even I would say, like, I've seen it on both sides.
Yeah.
I mean, the wow moment is, go ahead, Spencer.
No, yeah. Here's the wow moment for me is understanding that I could model and transform my data within the confines of Power BI Desktop. The wow moment was needing to do an analysis where there's multiple fact tables, there's data densification, multiple dimension tables for both fact tables, and boom, just being able to do that right again within Power Query and Power BI Desktop with the data modeling capability. And that's when my mind was like, okay, like that's the mindset. And I, keyword in that question or comment was a wow moment with data viz. I agree. There's not a lot of Power BI reports where I go, oh man, that is just mind-blowing data viz. No, you're right. But I do think that if you have the mindset of a data architect or database, data modeling, I think there can be some wow moments. Is that fair, Luke?
I think that I would also say, like, every organization it depends on, or even business unit within the organization, it really is a larger question of the data literacy of that org and how much they've used information before. I know that in previous roles, some insights that come strictly from a bar chart are the wow moment. It isn't necessarily clicking and dragging and dropping many things, rather just like going through measure by measure, dimension by dimension, and sort of slicing, and all of a sudden being like, oh, that's very interesting. I never saw that before.
Yeah.
I think that it just speaks to business intelligence tools in general, is being able to bring the numbers forward in any way. So
yeah,
I get it though. Like there are definitely, like Tableau can have a wow moment because you can do it super fast, but that's not to say that other tools can't do it.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally get that sentiment. Last thing here, Luke, and this will lead us out. Really great question from Ian. While there have been a lot of disruptions in the rest of the BI stack in the past 5 years, the data viz space has seen most of its innovation take place within established players. Do you see emerging tools being a serious threat to Tableau or Power BI's dominance in the next 5 years? That's a intriguing one.
It's a me question, I feel like. I think we talked about that leading up a little bit, which I felt like you were a little bit surprised with my response. And I think a lot of people would be surprised. Like the emerging tools are going to be the tools that have actually exist within some very large organizations, that being Looker with Google, potential for some serious evolution there. And then QuickSight with Amazon, given the resources, Amazon could be a very large player. There's certainly some, like, to me, ThoughtSpot is filling a very niche role on the NLP side that most organizations could still utilize, but there's a lot of room for innovation and a lot of, I think, future players that could be sought out. I personally have some vision things that I would love to see on the BI side in the future, but it's definitely something that still has to come.
Yeah, I'm going Power BI. I know we're out of time, but next 5 years, I see Power BI's updates every single month. They blow me away. Would love to see some improvement to the last question too, a little bit in some of the data viz options and flexibility, but short answer is no to Ian.
All right, gentlemen, we're at time. Yeah. Well done. Great discussion. We didn't get to every question. I apologize. We got to as many as we could. Keep an eye on tessellationtech.io and datacoach.com for more webinars and live streams like this. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Spencer. And we'll see y'all next time. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.